My name is Becca Simon, and I work in the Office of Archaeology and Historic Preservation. So I help protect and learn about all the amazing archaeology and historic places that we have in Colorado. And part of my job is to teach folks about things that people have done here. But before I talk about techniques and things and think about things in the past, I want to make sure that we all remember that we are living, recording, streaming, learning about people whose ancestors have lived here in the past, including the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, Apache, and the multiple bands of the Ute people. And not only are we going to be talking about their ancestors, but many people today still exist, and both living here in Denver, as well as other parts of our state, as well as New Mexico and Arizona. And we'll be looking at techniques that the Pueblo peoples that live in Texas and New Mexico and Arizona, as well as the Dene, or more commonly known as the Navajo, in multiple places as well. So, you know, I'm an archaeologist, so I talk a lot about the past, but I only know this stuff because these people are still around today and shared this wonderful knowledge with me. So it's a lot of fun. So we are going to be talking about pottery. And so I have some clay and different things here. I want to first kind of show off that pottery comes in a lot of shapes and sizes. So this is a mug that was made for me by a good friend. A lot of what I'll be showing you today and the techniques, I actually learned from my friend Paul Ermgiati at Crow Canyon Archaeological Center. And he made this for me when I left Crow Canyon to come and work for History Colorado. And it's in the design of some of the Pueblo peoples from the Mesa Verde region. We only see this kind of shape, a mug, be made by peoples in around the 11s and 1200s. So it's a really unique style and really cool. I have other things that are more modern. So this is from Huaque. It's one of the Pueblos in New Mexico, as well as these cute little turtles. And some from Mexico, some from Japan. This is made by it's just a snake, from a good friend, little girl who's now 13, but at the time she was about under 10. So pottery comes in a lot of different ways, and you can build it in a couple of different fashions. So we're going to jump into that, but you know, if you want to know more about pottery and different styles and things that are done in the past and done even today, there's a lot of great websites. The Institute for American Indian Arts has collections that's down in New Mexico, and those are people today learning traditional styles, as well as Crow Canyon has a lot of options. History Colorado, if you go to our digital archives, you can see pictures of all these wonderful things. There's lots of books, that talk about pottery and the like. You might notice in the back here, can you see? So this is a pot called a duck effigy pot, and I actually excavated that piece of pottery when I was working in the Southwest, and it was in just one little room, and the wall had come down and protected it. So we were able to recover that and see its beautiful features. So I'm going to show you how that kind of pottery came to be. So everyone, do you have your clay or your PlayDoh or whatever you have? Okay, I'm going to adjust some of this stuff. So if you don't have actual clay, so you could make it in a couple of ways. There's a lot of recipes online. One of the, we have So I attempted to make one of the recipes of a clay with some flour. So I got my Cortez flour over there, Bluebird, and made some Play-Doh. But we live at a high elevation, so making homemade clay and Play-Doh, you got to be careful and make sure the mixture. So see how it's kind of droopy? It's not going to work very well today. So I'm going to use regular clay because that one didn't work out so well. So I got myself some air dry clay that'll work just fine. All right. So we're going to move some of the fancy pots out of the way so we can see. All right. Okay. So the first kind of pot that what we're going to make is called a pinch pot. Now, people have been making pinch pots for a really long time, and they've made them all over our state and all over the world. And the nice thing about pinch pots is they're easy. And all they take is taking a little bit of clay and pinching it to make it to be the size and shape you want. So this is an example of a pinch pot that I made a long time ago when I was in grad school. Okay. And then this is one I made just real quick this morning. So what I want you guys to do is to take a little bit of your clay. And the big thing about pottery is that you want to always kind of make sure that it's really workable, whatever it is. So you don't want it too squishy and runny and all that kind of stuff, but you also don't want it to get hard. So you always want to kind of have a little bit of water nearby. So I have a bowl of water nearby to kind of help keep it movable, right? Because anyone tried to play with your Play-Doh or an old bead of clay and it totally crumbles and breaks and you can't do anything with it? Well, that's why you always kind of want to keep it moving and keep it kind of moist. If we were doing this traditionally back, in the 1200s when Mesa Verde or Chaco Canyon or even out on the plains, you would be taking actual clay from the rocks and canyons and mixing it with little bits of sand or twigs or other pieces of pottery to make what's called temper. Obviously, we're not crushing that up today, but the reason why you need to mix the clay and the temper is so when it does fire in a kiln, then it won't break, because then it'll prevent a lot of air bubbles and when the water goes out. So with your air dry clay and your Play-Doh, the companies and things like that have made it so that way it won't have that cracking effect. All right, so pinch pots. Everyone got a piece of clay and make it into a little ball? All right. Now, I don't want you to slap it down because by doing that, you'll make it too flat and then it'll make it not very strong. So when you pinch them, you just want to kind of start squeezing in and keep squeezing until you have the thickness even all around. Now, this is a little bit big of a pinch pot, but you keep making it and you really want it to be even. Now, if you wanted, you can just kind of keep it pinched and keep moving it around until it kind of has its own, and then place it on the table and it will make its own kind of base. But if you want to have it not directly touch the table, or you want a little bit more design, you could make a little base like this. So just take a smaller piece of clay, make a little ball. This one I want you to squish down, and then you can place it on there just for a little design, okay? Now, if you notice, that was super easy, right? Like you just kind of pinch it up and now you have a little bowl. Well, if you want to use this over and over again, the strength of this may not be super great for long-term use, okay? So what we see is that by making pottery by hand, you can actually make stronger and pieces of pottery that last longer with another technique, okay? We call it coil and scrape. So the idea behind here is that you'll have your base, and then you add coils of clay, so long strings of clay, and you add them together, and then you scrape it down so that way you connect them together. So that, this is also really why you want to make sure you have really good moldable clay and usable clay. And you want to make sure that you have a little bit of water because you're going to be working the clay a lot more. So here is an example that I started this morning where you can either make a base like we did before and add the coils like that, or you can actually take a coil and then wrap it around and then make that flat and that be your start. And that's what we call our base, so we can keep adding on it. So when you have your clay, just take a little piece, again, get it worked up. You need a little bit of water, add that too, okay? And you just wanna make coils. Now the important thing about when you're doing this is making sure you're keeping it even, because you don't want lots of different types of thicknesses, because when it dries, whether you use a kiln, if you were going to make this like a professional or someone trying to use it on a regular basis, or even if you're just leaving it air dry, you want that the coils to be even so that the clay dries evenly, it doesn't crack. So you make a coil and it's pretty even, right? Do the best you can. And then to make the base, you just kind of wrap it around, kind of like a spiral or a snail. And you want to make sure you push it together. And now I have my base, okay? And I could, at this point for my base, I just want to make sure it's kind of solidly together. Might want to flip it over a little bit. Now I can also, if I really want to, if I don't want to see that coil, I can take some sort of scraping tool. So I have a old guitar pick that I've used, but you can use your fingers, you can use a popsicle stick, you can use some sort of like a little piece of plastic, whatever. And you want to, you can just kind of scrape down your clay, and then you just don't even see the coil anymore. Now, people in the past probably used little pieces of gourd or other types of wood, or you know, old pottery sherds maybe, to scrape down their clay, whatever they kind of had in place. So now I have a base. So now to add onto that base, I want to, again, keep my clay nice and movable. Now take off another little piece of clay and I roll it out. And again, I want to try to keep it as even as possible. Okay, now it's kind of, so I have my coil, and now I take and add it to my base. And you're going to just kind of wrap it around like that. Now, this one is obviously a lot longer than the shape of my base right now. So I'm just going to take that little bit off and seal that together. Now, here's where the scraping comes in. Okay, so you can see the seams of all this. So I'm going to take a little bit of water to make sure it stays nice and wet. And then I'm going to take my scraper and I'm going to actually get in there and just kind of scrape it down so that I seal those two pieces together. Okay, and you just kind of do it real careful. You don't want to dive in and dig into it, because then you're just going to scrape away the whole thing, and then that's not going to be useful. But then if you just scrape them together and seal them kind of like that, so see how I put them together? I want to do this on the inside, especially because if I wait too long to do it, if I got like 5 coils inside and then I try to scrape inside, my hands are too big and you will just wreck the whole thing. So you want to do it for at least every couple of coils, but generally speaking, just do it every coil, right? You just go around and seal it, okay? Now you can also go on the outside and do the same thing. So you just kind of hold and then you just scrape it down. Now we see in archaeology that sometimes they decided not to scrape down the outside. And that was for a lot of reasons. Some of it's decoration, and some of it was for distributing heat so you can make a good cooking pot. So that way when you're trying to cook your beans, it doesn't boil all over every place. So depending on what you're using the pottery for, you may not scrape the outside down, okay? So see how I just kind of scrape it down. Now it's getting a little tacky. And then you just want to seal that down. If I wanted to just do a coil and leave the outside looking like that, I could also do what we call corrugations and just look little teeny bits of fingerprints into it, and that will seal it together so it can be used like a piece of cooking ware. We actually get really excited when we are doing archaeology or looking at stuff from the past, because sometimes you can see people's fingerprints in the pottery. It's kind of cool. All right, so now we want to get to the next one. So we'll take another piece, get a nice worked up ball, and roll it out. Need a little water, don't forget to add. Keep it nice, evenly. You don't want it too watery or it'll just kind of get all over the place and get goopy, okay? Make sure it's kind of even. Now, you want to add it on there, and super lucky. It went right exactly the right side. And what you'll be doing is making bigger and bigger ones depending on the shape, okay? So if you wanted a bowl, you would keep going bigger and bigger and bigger coils and adding them. If you wanted a jar, you'd go big for a while, and then you might come in and go smaller and then go back out, all right? So got your next coil on there. Take your little scraper tool, scrape the inside, get that sealed up. Now, depending on how workable your clay is, you might have to be really careful that you don't bend it too much and like that kind of thing. You never want to mess with it too much because that takes away the strength of it. But you want to make sure that it's workable enough that you can do what you need to do in terms of scraping and putting it together. You don't want to, handle it a lot so it just kind of falls apart. So scrape it down on the inside. Going around, make sure, go back with your fingers. If you get stuff on your scraper, just kind of put it to the side. But you can, if you scrape it down, you might end up with like extra stuff on your scraper. You can always add that back to your ball of clay, and then you can use it later, okay? So now we got the inside, and I want to take the outside. I'll take my scraper again. And I'm just gonna go around, scrape this down, get those sealed. Make sure I'm keeping it even. I don't want it too sticky. So I've gotten it a little bit sticky on my end, so I'm not gonna add any more water. And I'm just gonna seal those down. All right. Be careful. You always want to kind of make sure that you're not making any one side thicker than the other. Kind of keep it nice and even. Again, that keeps it from cracking or being weak anywhere on the pottery. Okay. Keep going back, getting it nice and sealed down.
Awesome. Becca, as you're finishing up here with the second coil, can you talk a little bit about, in your head, is this going to be a bowl or a jar?
I like to make jars because um, I like the challenge. But in my mind, what I plan to do is I'll probably do a couple more about this size rings, and then I'll come back and try to bring it back together like I did with this one. So this is what the style is sometimes called a kiva jar, right? And so I started with smaller coils, and then I got bigger, and then I came back. And in order to scrape them, I had to make sure that I did it each time.
Very cool. And then can you talk a little bit about the painting that you would do at the end of this?
Sure. Okay. So so here you can see that this paint is kind of a mix. This is all what we call organic paint, but you could use whatever kind of paint you have at home, obviously. All I have right now is puffy paint, but I'll just use it, a little bit of it, and I would take a little bit on here and put it someplace. And then I have, for these little tiny pots like we're making today, so like this is a full-size mug, right? Like someone can use, here we go. That's a full-size mug. And so you can use lots of different sizes of paintbrushes and things like that, whether it be yucca or modern ones and the like. For little guys like this, which we find both made by modern people as well as people in the past, sometimes it's easier just to take a toothpick because then you can get nice little shapes. Okay, so say I just wanted to get a nice crisp line, I'll take a little toothpick and I go back and forth. Now this is not the ideal paint, but if you have like acrylic paint, or if you are really ambitious and you get what's called bee weed, it's a type of plant that they would boil down and it would make a black paint. We also see paints that are made out of crushed rocks with a lot of iron in them. So that makes a nice black paint. It can be shiny. And I'll just take that and add the paint and make the line I want. Or if I wanted to take a paintbrush, I could do that. And maybe I want to make a I'm trying to make a turkey here.
Ooh, good question. Sienna in chat is asking, should we paint it when it's wet or when it's dry? Sienna, what do you think is going to be easier to do and would have actually make sure the pattern would actually stay if you painted it when it was wet or when it was dry? Yeah, let's think about painting this when it's dry. And we want to wait until the whole shape is done. We know what it's going to look like. We want to wait until the whole thing is dried before we think about how we might put some slip on it, like a whitewash, and then how we might go ahead and paint it. If you were with me last week, you would have seen we were looking at making yucca paintbrushes that were the traditional kind of paintbrushes ancestral Pueblo people made. And if you think about some of those very geometric designs that we looked at last week too, that a lot of lines and a lot of triangles and that kind of thing. Okay, want to be mindful of everyone's time today. So I did want to throw out there, thank you so much, Becca, but if anyone has any questions for Becca as she's finishing up this second coil, go ahead and throw them in chat and I'll toss them out there and we can talk about, Becca and I could probably talk about pottery for a really long time.
Yeah, no, pottery is really fun. I know a couple people of my friends from Pro Canyon are all out there. I shout out to them to everything they've taught me and that I've learned from them. You know, pottery comes in a lot of cool designs. There's the geometric. Another thing to think about though is that when you talk about painting, you want to make sure that you, if you were going to fire it in a kiln, they actually did the painting on the pottery when it was air dry and not after they put it in the kiln, right? So you got it air dry, then you paint it, and then you put it in the kiln. That way, when it's baked together, then the actual paint is also kind of baked and made permanent on the top too. So
that's awesome. Well, cool. I'm not seeing questions in chat. Let me do a quick scan through our gallery, see if I ever get any hands raised out there. No, doesn't look like it. So again, wanted to say thank you so much, Rebecca, for showing us this pottery. It's super awesome. Really appreciate it. If you want to hold up your clay pottery to the camera so we can see how people are doing. Nice. Looks like we've got a bunch of nice starts out there. We've got a mug going. That's awesome. Nevaeh is going to take as long as it takes to dry, unfortunately. It's going to vary by clay. If you're working with something that is like what Becca's working with, like an air dry clay, it should happen pretty quick, but some of these are going to take longer than others, and you're just going to have to keep checking to see if it's dry. Okay.
Yeah, my Crayola clay on the box says 2 to 3 days, but it's going to be different depending on what clay you used.
And certainly if you're in Colorado, it's going to go faster than if you're like in Michigan or something. All right, well, awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today, friends.